Καλημέρα σε όλους. Θα ήθελα να σας καλωσορίσω στο σημερινό πάνελ. Σύμφωνα με το πρόγραμμα, ο Κώστας Καρκαγιάννης θα ήταν σήμερα στη θέση του συντονιστή. I was drafted last minute να παίξω αυτόν εδώ το ρόλο. Έχουμε δύο πραγματικά διακεκριμένους ομιλητές σήμερα. Στα αριστερά μου κάθεται ο συνάδελφός μου στο Οικονομικό Πανεπιστήμιο, ο Νίκος Χριστοδουλάκης. Ο Νίκος έχει τελειώσει από το Εθνικό Μετσόβιο Πολυτεχνείο. Για να μιλήσω κι εγώ με τους όρους που μίλησε χθες ο κύριος Τσομόκος για τον πρόεδρο της Βουλής, θα μου επιτρέψει. Δεν το θέλει πολύ αυτό το πράγμα, ότι ήταν ένα από τα ηγετικά στελέχη του αντιδικτατορικού αγώνα στην Ελλάδα. Μετά είχε μια ακαδημαϊκή καριέρα πραγματικά λαμπρή και επίσης είχε και σημαντική συμβολή στην πολιτική, όπου έφτασε να είναι για χρόνια Υπουργός Οικονομικών, πέρα από άλλες θέσεις τις οποίες κατήχε. Στα δεξιά μου κάθεται ο δόκτωρ Heiner Flassbeck. Έρχεται από την Γερμανία. Αυτή την περίοδο είναι ο εκδότης ενός ιντερνετικού περιοδικού ονόματι Microscope, το οποίο είναι πραγματικά πολύ influential. Είχε επίσης μια πολύ σημαντική καριέρα και σε πολύ διαφορετικά πόστα. Έχει εργαστεί στο Γερμανικό Συμβούλιο Οικονομικών Εμπειρογνωμόνων. Έχει εργαστεί στην UNCTAD στα Ηνωμένα Έθνη και επίσης έχει υπάρξει State Secretary, δηλαδή υφυπουργός στο Υπουργείο Οικονομικών το Ομοσπονδιακό της Γερμανίας. Τώρα διδάσκει στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Αμβούργου, στο οποίο είναι επίσης και επίτιμος καθηγητής. Στη σημερινή ομιλία μας θα θέλαμε να επικεντρωθούμε στην ιστορία της Ευρωζώνης. Είναι 20 χρόνια τώρα που το ευρώ υπάρχει σαν νόμισμα. Μετά από τα πρώτα χρόνια, τα οποία ήταν εξαιρετικά, πέρασαμε στα χρόνια της κρίσης και όλοι λέμε ότι χρειαζόμαστε κάποια επόμενα βήματα. Ποια είναι τα βήματα αυτά? Αυτό είναι που θέλουμε να συζητήσουμε στη σημερινή μας συνάντηση. Αλλά πριν πάμε σε εκείνο το σημείο, θα ήθελα να ξεκινήσω από κάπου πιο παλιά. Σε αυτό το σημείο επιτρέψτε μου να πάω στα αγγλικά ώστε να έχουμε κάποια απευθείας επαφή. Let me switch to English now. I would like to start, today's session is about the Eurozone, and I would like to ask, first of all, when the Eurozone created, we had several experiences of other monetary unions before that. Were the lessons from these monetary unions applied when the rules of the game were set for the establishment of the Eurozone? Could I ask you?
Yeah, thank you very much. The answer is very simple, no. Yeah, unfortunately it's like that. There are a lot of rules in the Eurozone. They were created mainly under German leadership, but unfortunately these rules were not the most important ones and not the crucial ones for the success of a currency union. Let me briefly say what was forgotten. It was forgotten that the main thing about a currency union is the inflation target. You have a common inflation target, and everybody has to adjust to that inflation target. And to do that, you don't have monetary policy anymore. How do you adjust to the inflation target? Well, through wages, wage policy or wage developments. Unit labor cost is the most important thing to determine the inflation rate in any country of the world. So what happened after the euro was created, and I was at that time in office in Bonn, it was even Bonn. What happened? Well, two countries after a while violated the rule, the main rule of the game, namely to stick to the inflation target very dramatically. One of these countries you all know is called Greece. Everybody talks about that. The other country, hardly anyone talks about that, is Germany. So there were two countries deviating from that rule, Greece upwards, Germany downwards. And this created a huge gap in competitiveness among these countries and an absolutely unsustainable gap. The only country that got it right was France. But the only country that really stuck to the inflation target in terms of its wage developments. But even France has lost against Germany because Germany was undervalued. So Germany had a real, what economists call a real depreciation, quite significant, and it is still there. It's not gone. And the reflex of that significant real depreciation in Germany is its huge current account surplus. And that current account surplus, I hope we are discussing that here, is the main problem in Eurozone because it's blocking all the other countries to do what they could do to get out of the slump. Let me say one word. We're now in a really dramatic situation in Europe. Europe is entering recession. You may have seen the leading indicators. In Germany, it's absolutely clear Germany is in a recession already. So France and Italy are following. All the other countries will follow most probably. So we are in a recession, but for the first time, we do not have monetary policy to fight the recession. You see, monetary policy is gone. My friend Mario Draghi is doing whatever he can, but he cannot do anything more. So we have no revival. We had in this recovery, what is called a recovery, we had no revival of investment. We did not have an investment boom or something like that. Even in Germany, investment was flat all the time for 10 years since 2009. And unemployment all over the place is very high still. In Germany, it's lower than elsewhere, but even in Germany, we have 3-4 million people that are unemployed, and now we're entering recession. This is, so to say, the worst case scenario that you can imagine in this wonderful world. Thank you.
I think that the first 20 years of the Eurozone show us some very good results, but at the same time reveal several weaknesses of the project. First of all, I believe that the Eurozone has been a very, very useful creation for the European Union and European citizens. It may have several drawbacks which can be eventually rectified, but nevertheless I think that the overall consequence which it had on the life of the average European citizen has been a strongly positive one. Let me say a few things about potential shortcomings and criticism against the Eurozone. I think it's good to remember that the main concern when the Eurozone was designed was that it could not stand the commonality of shocks, which means that if shocks were perturbing various economies of the Union, of the Eurozone, the national economies could not react properly, and some of them eventually could be demolished. That was the business cycle concern, which guided several restrictive policies like the inflation one in the beginning. I think that the outcome on this front was very successful. Of course, I'm talking before the crisis, where the great moderation actually smoothed the business cycles and made the implementation of monetary policy quite successful, or at least not very unsuccessful. The second expectation of the Eurozone was that growth would somehow be augmented, and this would be done through the free capital movement and eventually through the freer and freer movement of human resources across the members of the euro area. This didn't happen. So I think that at the end, after 20 years, Eurozone has been labeled in world economics as a low growth area. And I think that this is the strongest challenge which we are going to face in the years to come. Add to this two more things. One thing is that the Eurozone was unprepared to act when the crisis erupted in 2008. And this is true. In fact, not only it was unprepared, but I think it was looking somewhere else. And it's easy to remember that some policy decisions which were taken in the summer of 2008 were going to the opposite direction. For example, by raising interest rates just before Lehman Brothers collapsed, and several other actions, plus the attitude which was adopted to stay away from the American crisis. And of course, this had to be paid later at a very heavy cost. Another thing which I would like to add in my introductory remark is that we often hear the criticism that the Eurozone is not a complete fiscal union, which is true, of course. But let me remind everybody that nobody wanted a fiscal union at that time, and I doubt how many people in the European Union today want to have a fiscal union in the Eurozone. So I think that the Eurozone, after all, has been the best of the existing at that time possibilities. This is not in order to forgive everything, but I think this is in order to make us to be realistic about what we can expect in the future from the Eurozone. And in my view, as I'm going to talk a few minutes later, is the growth challenge which is ahead of us, and this is exactly what has to be tackled in the next few years. Thank you.
Can I respond? Yeah, I fully agree, and as far as the creation of the euro is concerned, I was always in favor of the euro. I even pushed the chairman of the Social Democrats to be in favor of the euro in Germany, so at that time. We have to acknowledge that it went wrong. The design was wrong, the Maastricht Treaty was wrong to a certain extent, but that could have been corrected and could have been worked out after some time, but then came the Stability and Growth Pact in a situation where you need fiscal policy. Let me briefly explain what I mean. We have a totally new situation all over the place in the world, not only in Europe. We have a totally new situation because, to the surprise of many, the company sector in our economies is not performing in the way it performed 50 years ago. The company sector in most of our economies is a net saver. And with the company sector being a net saver, you do not have the transformation of savings of the private households into investment anymore. So who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? Someone has to do that. I can tell you there are only two ways to solve that problem. It's a fundamental problem. It's the most fundamental problem, in my opinion, all over the world. The US have solved that problem by government spending, by government deficit, by deficit spending. US government deficit has exploded over the last years because they have a current account deficit, so we are, so to say, saving for them. In addition to the government, to the private household saving and the company saving. So who's going to be the debtor? Someone has to be the debtor. Obviously, it can only be the government for logical reason. There's no one else around. So the government is spending like hell, and you see the result is fabulous. They have high growth over the years. They have full employment. They had even 3% growth last year. And Europe has nothing. But Europe has exactly the same problem. Namely, the company sector is a net saver, is not investing, is not the debtor, despite zero interest rates. So that all despite zero interest rates. So what are we going to do? So the only way out is to put the government in the place of the private sector. But that is forbidden in Europe. That is not allowed, you see? The only way out is not allowed because of the fiscal rules. The fiscal rules forbid exactly that. So what are we going to do? For logical reasons, we cannot do anything. We have to wait, I don't know, for what? And this is stupid. This is really stupid. We do not face the reality. Reality says we should spend money. And you see, then there's one country out there that is doing better. One country has found a wonderful solution. That country is Germany. Germany has found a wonderful solution. Germany is not having deficit spending of the government. They have even surpluses in the government. And despite the fact that the companies are net savers in Germany, so what is the solution? Oh, a current account surplus. Isn't that wonderful? We all should have current account surpluses. Unfortunately, that's impossible. And I tell you, the United States will not allow Europe as a whole to have a huge current account surplus like Germany. So in Germany, the debtors are you. All the countries outside are the debtors. So Germany has solved the problem in a mercantilistic way, but that's obviously not possible for all the others. So following Germany in our fight for competitiveness is, sorry to say it again, stupid. And this we have to discuss, and unfortunately it's not discussed because everybody is still trying to follow Germany. So as long as we go for that, it's impossible. We'll never find a solution.
Right, perfect. I should admit that this is the part of the conversation where I would have tried to lead it a bit further down the road. However, let me go back to what I was mentioning before. We started, let's say, with the creation of the euro, and then we had, let's say, some fabulous years. Then, after Lehman Brothers, the crisis comes to the Eurozone, and it is a severe crisis. During the crisis, several measures were taken, supposedly to strengthen, or perhaps to strengthen the Eurozone herself. We had, let's say, the creation of ESM. We had the almost somehow a bit incomplete banking union. We had all these fiscal rules, about deficits and so on. The question is, are these sufficient? If they are not sufficient, how they should be completed? And later on, we are going to the big question about fiscal union. Let's forget about fiscal union at the moment. Let's have an evaluation of the steps that were taken during the crisis. Can I start with Nikos this time?
Let me say first that I broadly agree with most of the remarks made by Heiner about the unused potential of the Eurozone. And this actually condemns the Eurozone to be a low-growth area in the world economy. The point is how to do it. I think that the first timid steps were taken during the crisis because, at least in the beginning, the first couple of years, several economies in the Eurozone showed a tendency to spend more in order to revive their economies, and several of them actually exited the crisis very quickly. But I think that history will not stand that much on this point. I think that history will judge the Eurozone on how it faced the crisis in the periphery, starting from Greece and then spreading elsewhere. And I think that the main problem in that decision was, first of all, misdiagnosing the crisis, and second, reacting too strongly on the wrong fraud. What I mean by that? First of all, I believe, but this is another lengthy discussion, but nevertheless I think it's useful to remind it from time to time that we didn't have a debt crisis, actually. We had a liquidity crisis because of the huge external deficits which were exposing the periphery countries, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and eventually Cyprus. And because the international liquidity had been strained to an unprecedented degree, all those economies were suffocated. And eventually they had to ask for bailouts. So I think that the major intervention after the outbreak of the crisis should have been how to instill liquidity in those economies, not how to face a debt crisis. Okay, Greece was having a twin deficit problem. It was a little bit more exaggerated case, but I think that at the core of the crisis in Europe, it was not the problem of debt. Even Greek debt was minuscule as compared to the overall debt of the Eurozone. So I think that the misdiagnosis actually affected the type of decisions. After the Eurozone was mobilized in order to face the crisis, I think it took measures which were not in an affinity of practical implementation. It imposed a very front-loaded austerity package which could not be actually carried out in a reasonable time frame. And this created huge domestic resistance and opposition, especially in this country, which undermined the efficacy of the program. And then this caused a second wave of measures and so on, until we arrived in today's position. My best example in this case has been Spain itself, because Spain actually followed a domestic reaction to the crisis, which tried to prevent front-loaded logic to dominate the formation of policy. And to my view, at least, I think it succeeded because after a couple of years, after taking domestic measures in order to face the crisis or the early phase of the crisis, I think that we saw the Spanish economy to grow more than 2%, definitely above the Eurozone, and actually it goes in a healthy way up to date. So I think that these two problems characterized the response of the Eurozone to the crisis. Of course, countries have to be thankful because they have received massive amounts of money which helped them and facilitated them to avoid debt default and all this type of things. But I think that this does not eliminate the drawbacks of both the diagnosis of the crisis and the way that policies were implemented.
Yeah, I fully agree that it was never a debt crisis, never a public debt crisis, definitely. But from the beginning it was interpreted in that way by certain kind of ideologists all around the place. So it was called a debt crisis, and then the recipe was obvious. The recipe was then, if you have a debt crisis, you cut debt. But cutting debt, as we should know, economists should know, is not so simple. If you have a shrinking economy, to cut debt, well, it's a difficult exercise. But that was not taken into account. And the main problem still was that everybody stuck to the German solution. The German solution was you have to become like Germany. Nobody said that's impossible. Huh? My friend Varoufakis never said, unfortunately, that's impossible. He talked about Greece and Greece and Greece, but he never talked about Germany. I told him 10 times, talk about Germany, not about Greece. So, but he should have said, well, not everybody can become competitive, because Germany is competitive, so everybody cannot copy now the German model. And by cutting public expenditure, it will not help. So Greece was the model, so to say, the role model of doing this stupid thing, namely to cut wages by 30%, but even Greece did not achieve to become competitive in a way like Germany and to export its way out of the crisis. Why? Because Germany is even still more competitive despite the 30% cut in Greece wages. But all this was not discussed. The problem, you see, I fully agree, the problem is we do not have serious discussion all over the place in Europe. They are coming up with, the council is meeting, the council is deciding something, mostly influenced by Germany, because Germany is strong. Germany, due to the liquidity crisis, was the creditor is always strong in such a crisis when the markets are not delivering the money. Then the creditor is becoming strong, so Germany became super strong, and all the others gave in and said, well, the Germans are dictating what we have to do, and that must be right, because they are successful. No, that was wrong.
In fact, I must admit that in all the Eurogroup meetings that I was participating, there were voices there asking, okay, that this is a solution. You know, the Krugman argument, if we all become, let's say, with current account surpluses, who will have the deficit? We must export it to Martians and so on. However, yeah,
sorry, but we should have brought it to a political fore. I never heard top politicians speaking about that. I encourage many, including your current prime minister, to talk about it, but I never heard him to talk about it. And the French and the Italians are still not, no, the Italians not. The Italians are talking about it now. The Italians are the first ones. This Italian government, like it or not, is the first government that is talking about that problem. The French government is not yet talking about the problem. I don't know why, but they should know it at least. But they're not talking about it, talking about European finance minister and things like that, which is all deviation from the main problem. The main problem is we need fiscal policy, and we do not have fiscal policy.
Right, this brings me, let's say, to the next step there. Naturally, what are the necessary steps now? You have already referred to some elements of this plan. What are the next steps for the Eurozone? First of all, in order to survive, and secondly, in order to thrive. Incidentally, I would like, since you mentioned it in the very end of your intervention now, there are many people who say that if you look at history, the only successful monetary unions were the ones who were also fiscal unions. In fact, in several instances, fiscal union was preceding monetary union. Do you agree with this opinion? Are we in a position to move in this direction? I know.
I think it's half right, half wrong. The fiscal union as such is not the solution, because we have to understand that we need fiscal policy in a different manner than in the past. But this is not the same as fiscal union. If we have fiscal union in Germany, the German dogma of fiscal consolidation is dictating the rules in the fiscal union, then the fiscal union means nothing. The fiscal union has to mean we change our mindset concerning fiscal policy, the role and the need for fiscal policy at this moment of time. But we're extremely far away from that. In Germany, it's not even discussed. I'm discussing every day somewhere in Germany this problem of the companies being net savers, which is logically absolutely clear that they then need another debtor. But nobody's willing to discuss. It's not even if I put it in a newspaper or elsewhere, the next day is immediately forgotten. Nobody's talking about it. The top politicians never talk about it. The top lobbyists of the industry never talk about it. So we cannot get it to the political fore, and as long as it's not discussed, how can you explain to the German public, who everybody believes in Germany, the whole population, 99% of the population believe that the German way is the only feasible way in this world? How can you convince such a population that it is not? Because now we have fiscal union in Europe. Nobody will believe it. And you will fail. You will dramatically fail, because the rules will then by the fiscal union be applied as now without the fiscal union. That is not a solution. It could be a solution, but only if we change our whole mindset about economics.
Okay, leaving aside fiscal union, in your opinion, what are the next steps that are necessary for the survival of the Eurozone then, and the thriving?
Yeah, the next step is to yeah, sorry, I cannot repeat myself, is to rethink the rules of fiscal policy. Demolish the fiscal growth and stability pact. What else do you want me to say? We have to get rid of it. It's wrong. It's wrong. It cannot work. It is totally dysfunctional in this world. And as I said, we are now entering a recession with zero interest rates, so monetary policy cannot do anything. We have to learn now the harsh lesson that it doesn't work in the way it was foreseen in the Maastricht Treaty, which was aggravated in the Stability and Growth Pact. It has to be.
And what do we have to put in its place? For instance, think of countries like.
No, we have to become pragmatic about fiscal policy. As I said, to take the United States. You know, the funny thing was there was the State of the Union speech by Trump, and the response by Nancy Pelosi, and nobody even mentioned the word debt. Huh? Can you imagine? They had, last fiscal year, they had an additional government debt of something like 800 billion additional debt to all that what they have. They have 100% now in GDP. And they have their ongoing extremely high debt. And nobody mentioned even the word debt. This is surprising. They don't care about it anymore. And you don't have to care about it because interest rates are zero, so why should you care about government debt? There's no reason for that. It's just our dogma, and everybody, and not everybody, but again, 98% of the economists still believe in that dogma, in Germany at least. And so what we need to go forward is the fight against this dogma.
Let me state first a paradox which prevails today in the Eurozone, which I call it the paradox of prosperity, or if you like it, of seemingly prosperity. If you compare today's Eurozone with its position of the countries consisting of the Eurozone 40 years ago, in the early 80s, and look at the place they had in the world economy, you see easily that it has shrunk to about half of it. It was 30% of world output back 40 years ago, and it's now shrunk to about 15% of world output, because several other countries have actually grew very fast. But at the same time, per capita GDP in the Eurozone is constantly about 3 times higher than the world per capita average, which means that still the Eurozone keeps a very high level of per capita prosperity, despite the fact that the relative productive base is shrinking in world terms. How this paradox is explained? I think by two factors. First of all is the aging population, which is a major problem in the European Union and the Eurozone, of course. And the other problem is that it has not invested sufficiently in new production in order to recover the world share in various sectors. So I think that these two challenges need something to be done in order to rectify and face the consequences. And I think that the only way to face this is fiscal activism, or fiscal planning, if you like, on a major scale. I realize that the heart of the fiscal union, which everybody says that it may be the solution to all problems, is mutualization of debts, of national debts, something which I think is never going to happen, because this is opposed fiercely by German public opinion mainly, and perhaps by the Hanseatic Union and other countries. But I think that there is an intermediate step at least to try to mutualize debt for growth. For example, by issuing a kind of federal bonds which can support large-scale infrastructure across the Union and across the Eurozone in particular, and at the same time finance a new aggressive type of industrial policy, which I think is going to be very vital in order to sustain and extend growth in the future. Another issue which also requires, I think, financial resources, which have to come from the state, from a new type of fiscal policy, is immigration. Because this is the fastest way, perhaps, in order to face the age problem which we have in the Eurozone and the European Union at large. And I think that this will require massive infrastructures, plus, of course, the financing of extensive social policies in order to assimilate new people in the Union. So I think that we need a new concept of fiscal policy in the years to come in order to face these major challenges. And the end result of that would be higher growth, higher real growth, not just per capita because of the diminished population, but actually higher growth because of higher productivity and higher production. And I think that this is the only way to face the high unemployment, which is otherwise going to be a scourge in the European Union for everybody.
A second point I would like to mention, we agree on fiscal policy, as I understand, but the second point is also very important, and that is, again, facing a dogma, an economic dogma, neoclassical, neoliberal dogma, that is wages. We have to understand we're talking about inclusive growth in this forum. What is inclusive growth? The minimum for inclusive growth is that full participation of the workers in the proceeds of the economic process. That is not happening now in Europe. Why is it not happening? Well, again, because most of the people believe that the German model is a role model for them, and that to tighten your belt is a good thing. It's wrong. As I said before, it worked once for one country, namely for Germany, but it cannot work for everyone. And this fight for competitiveness, which is still in all the official documents, we have to increase our competitiveness by tightening our belt, will not work for the European Union as a whole. And we have to understand that participation, full participation of all the workers in the productivity increase is absolutely crucial for the success of such a big, closed economy as the European Union is. You know, the problem from the beginning, you talked about the problems at the beginning. I can tell you the main problem from the beginning was that many people, including most of the people in Germany, believed that or did not understand that the European Monetary Union is something different from Germany or from Greece. Everybody thought we continue working as a small open economy, and small open economies you have to improve your competitiveness to survive. No, the Eurozone is a big closed economy. As the United States or as Japan or other countries, and they have to have domestic sources of growth. We have to understand that we have domestic sources of growth. It's not all about export, sorry to say that. Yesterday night I heard again, exports, free trade is the only solution for the world. No, it's not. The world has no trade at all. For the world, there is no trade, sorry to say that. It looks nice to talk about trade. Everybody likes to talk about trade, and trade is a solution. No, the world has no trade. The world has only consumption and investment. And for consumption, you need the full participation of the people in the results of the economic process. And if you don't have that, you never get anywhere. And this was also lacking in the last years, in Greece in particular because of the wage cuts. But everywhere now, there is huge pressure in France and Italy. There's huge pressure on wages, so wages are rising much less than is needed to be successful. And again, it depends on the German dogma that everybody has to become competitive. And if you are not, I mean, the rest of the world, the rest of the other countries are not fighting that dogma, then I have to say I'm very skeptical about the future of the Eurozone. I would like to be optimistic, but at the moment I don't see that there's any government around that would be willing, or a coalition of governments would be even better, that would be willing to challenge the Germans on their dogma.
Right. I was told that we must be sharp 10:25 finishing this session. I would like to ask whether there is any quick question from the audience to our two distinguished speakers. Then, Yep, Nico, go.
I think that if fiscal policy is redesigned in the Eurozone, I think it could be a good thing in the long term and in the medium term. But let me say that the situation is not as bad everywhere. For example, the average in the euro area is 1% primary surplus this year, and it was just 1.2% primary surplus last year. So I think it was stringent, but not too that stringent. I think that the situation becomes really dramatic in certain countries which actually need some economic expansion even more, like Greece, for example, where the primary surpluses have risen above 4%. Portugal, where they have reached only 3% of GDP, and Cyprus, 5.5%. So I think that we live today in a situation where countries and economies which need economic growth desperately in order to create employment and exit recession for good, I think they are subject to ferocious austerity, which actually cuts growth for years to come. And I think that a small step in the right direction would be to reconsider these excessive fiscal positions for these periphery countries and help them at the same time to recover in investment, public infrastructure, new jobs, and new policies to create growth for the future. I think that if this experiment is successful, perhaps it may be a good lesson out of the Greek crisis and the peripheral crisis, rather than the bad lessons which have taken place in the past few years. Thank you. Thanks.
Very brief. I couldn't agree more on this. But as I said before, the point is we need European discussions. We need real discussion, not just political statements here and there. We need real discussion, and we have to face the situation that there are different opinions. And this different opinions should be spoken out. They should be put on the table so that everybody knows there are different opinions. And this is missing. I've been sitting in the Eurogroup for a time, and I was always shocked by the not existing will to discuss. And this is wrong. Europe cannot exist, and Europe cannot strive and prosper if we are not severely and radically, sometimes radically, discussing the economic model on which the European Monetary Union at this moment is based, and if we are not questioning that model. Thank you.
Right. Let me thank everybody for the participation in this panel. of course, primarily Nikos and Heiner for the discussion. And let me call Stamatis Zacharos, the coordinator of the next panel, and the members of the panel to the podium. Thank you very much.